Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Orlando. I'm Linnea Nelson and I'm chair of the worship team. It is glorious to be here together, worshiping both in person and those of you who are worshiping online simultaneously. And today, leading worship is Reverend Margalie Belizaire, Aubrey Connelly-Candelario, Logan Turner, and Larry Watchorn. I want to remind you that next week, the time changes. So make sure you set your clock, or you could come early. We welcome all who join us as we explore our Unitarian Universalist faith, which draws us into a community of justice seekers with a commitment to lifelong spiritual growth and compassionate service in the community. If you'd like to watch this service again online later, it will be available shortly after the live service. And during our Time for All Ages today, we've offered paper leaves for those in person, and we encourage all of you at home to either pick a leaf from a thriving plant or cut one out to use during the service. If you didn't get one, no worries, you can grab one on the way out. Children are encouraged to take as many leaves as you would like and perhaps decorate one of the windows back there during the service. We'd be very grateful for that beauty you'd bring to us. So for more information about our congregation, go to orlandouu.org or email WelcomeTeam@orlandouu.org. And our announcements for today all have links in our newsletter or on our website and will be repeated for those of you watching online at the end of the service. Now, right after service today, our in-person fellowship will take place informally by the Labyrinth. Please keep social distancing in place and we will hold the online fellowship simultaneously at 10:30. One of the online breakout rooms is the Welcome Center, where you can bring any questions you have about our church. Next, I want to make sure you know today is the last day to go to the online Volunteer Opportunity Fiesta, although there will continue to be things online about what's going on here at 1U, but you can find out about all the groups, all the life activities, and get involved by going to the Volunteer Fiesta online. And I'd love for you to keep November 10th on your calendar. That's when we're going to have the blood drive here at 1U. There'll be more information on that next week. We also have a basket and envelopes for making your donations in the box at the back of our worship service today. And you can make an offering online as well to support the many ministries of this congregation. Go to Orlando UU and click the donate button in the upper right corner, send a text or mail a check. You can also give to our Share the Plate partner this month, this is the last week for it, the Coalition of Margalie Workers, and you can do that directly on their website. But please let us know you donated by dropping a line to programassistant1u@gmail.com. Now, the last day also for the Share the Plate nomination form is today. So if you know of a great organization serving our Central Florida community, please consider nominating them. The nomination form can be found in the chat for those of you online and in our weekly update. It is wonderful being with you here today, both those of you here in person and those of you online, and I look forward to worshiping together with you once again.
Please say the words with me as we light the chalice. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, sustain, and to share.
Today, on Halloween, and during a time of year when the veil between our world and that of the dead is considered thin in many cultures, I call us to worship with Bound by Love. Gather we now into this space this time when the wheels turn and the veil shatters, gather we now to remember, to grieve, to prophesize, to complete our harvest before the long dark comes. Gather we now to tell the old stories and sing the old songs, to be as we have been, the voice of our people eternal. Gather we now to celebrate that which was, that which is, and that which will be. Gather we now, as we have always done, united by story and bound by love. Andrea Hawken Camper. Come, friends, let us worship together.
Little background. Our Time for All Ages this morning is an adaptation from a DRE colleague. For a long, long time, humans have believed that at this time of year, in the fall, spirits of the dead are closer to the world of the living. Holidays recognizing this closeness between life and death have been celebrated in many different ways and in many traditions, as Reverend Margalie will share later during the sermon. We do not need to fear those who've died, but sometimes we do anyway. We can choose to honor the people we call ancestors instead of being afraid. I just realized my mask is still on, sorry. To honor our ancestors means to remember who they really were, especially the good things, but also the challenging things about them. To honor our ancestors means to choose to be aware of who we are now that was influenced by them, and that how we choose to live now will influence those who come after us. And to honor our ancestors means to know that even though they have died, in our hearts and minds they are present at every time of year. For those of you who have joined in person this morning, you were given a leaf shape. And for those of you at home, I hope you will take the time to pick a leaf from a thriving plant. I'd like to invite you to think about an ancestor, physical or spiritual, who's died, a family member, or perhaps a friend who was important in your life. Or perhaps it's even someone you never met, but whose life and legacy has impacted yours. Let's take a moment to honor your memories of these ancestors. And you can either take a pen and write their name on the leaf, or you can use your finger because you will know what name you are writing. And you can do this now or later, and if you'd like to pick up a few more leaves on your way out, you are welcome to do so. Because what you can do is you can put this somewhere where you will see it. And the leaves upon which you've written the names of your ancestors are now symbols of their spirits. The spirits of our beloved dead are like leaves which have fallen from a tree of life to make room for new leaves. Our lives, our joys and pains are growing. Like leaves that fall from a tree, they are not gone from the world. When a leaf falls from a tree, it falls to the ground and eventually becomes part of the earth again to nurture that tree. And when you arrive at home and you put it somewhere, I don't know, maybe it'll be a mirror, a window, the refrigerator, the presence of the leaf with the name on it symbolizes the presence of the spirit of our ancestors in the room with you. And some of us will understand that spiritual presence as something real and outside of ourselves. And others will understand the spirits as present in the memories and dreams of the living people who are here to name them. At this time, I invite you all to silently name those you have invited to be with us in spirit this morning. Beloved ancestors, we welcome you into this sacred space this morning. We thank you for your gifts, our lives, and our families.
As you continue to be in a space where you are thinking about your beloveds or ancestors who you've had a difficult time with, as you're in the mood of thinking about them, reflecting on them, I invite you to bring yourself fully to this space. And as we make space for the joys and concerns of this congregation, I also invite you, those of you online, to join in our communion of names and add the name of those who are on your heart this morning, whether they are there due to a joy or a concern. And for those of you who are here in person, let us continue in this reflective mood and quietly reflect on those who are on your heart this morning, whether due to a joy or a concern. Bring your joys and bring your sorrows and grace and all of you. Bring it all with you here this morning. Come as you are. Your whole self is welcome in this sacred space that we are co-creating together. Let's take a couple of deep breaths together. Breathe as you would normally, with the full awareness that that breath is life itself. That breathing is something that our body does for us so naturally. And as your body breathes you here this morning among friends or soon to be friends, I invite you to just quietly meditate. We want today to be a day where you are able to just take a moment and just reflect quietly on those who came before you, on those who came before us. Our ancestors, whether they are ancestors by blood, ancestors by choice, the ancestors of our faith. Let us be open to spirit. I am driving home from school when the radio talk turns to E.B. White, his birthday, and I exit the here and now of the freeway at rush hour, travel back in the past where my mother is reading to my sister and me the part about Charlotte laying her eggs and dying. And though this is the 5th time Charlotte has died, my mother is crying. And we are laughing at her because we know nothing of loss and its sad math. How every subtraction is exponential. How each grief multiplies the one preceding it. How the author tried 17 times to record the words, "She died alone without crying." 17 takes and a short walk during which he called himself ridiculous, a grown man crying for a spider he'd spun out of the silk thread of invention. Wondrous how those words would come back and make him cry. Yes, wondrous to hear my mother's voice 10 years after the day she died. The catch, the rasp, the gathering up before she could say to us, "I'm okay." Sarah Freelight, from her book Sad Math, published by Moon City Press.
The ancestor I'm honoring today is my mom's older sister, my Aunt Cora. She was different than other family members. Some maybe describe her as a bit of a rebel. When she married, she and her husband left the rural area where they grew up and they moved to the city, eventually making their way to South Florida. She smoked, she enjoyed her vodka, and she had this way of accepting others for just who they were, perhaps because she never really felt accepted by her family. She worked as a teacher's assistant with kids who had challenges, mostly kids of color who needed a little extra attention, care, and love. She also taught art to students who otherwise would never have been exposed to it. Growing up over the summer months, my mother would drive my 2 brothers and me from Wisconsin to Florida to visit my aunt's family. Those were some of the best memories of my youth and had a lot to do with me ending up in Florida. When I came out as queer to help my mother process the news, my middle brother arranged a visit between my mother and my Aunt Cora. You see, my aunt had a wide variety of friends and adopted family, including those of the queer community. My Aunt Cora was one of the few people who I never doubted her love for me. She died in 2008. A couple months after her death, I was practicing yoga. We had just moved into Shavasana, the final resting pose, when I felt this energy around me, and I heard her voice saying, "Finally, you have slowed down enough for me to visit, and for you to listen." And aside, stillness is not my forte. She went on to tell me that she loved me, that she was safe and in a good place, that my mom loved me, and even though she may not know how to show it in ways that I needed, she did. She also told me it was time to love myself. And with those words, as quickly as she appeared, she departed. To honor my Aunt Cora, I tried to take time on my mat on the anniversary of her birth and her death. She hasn't visited me again, or perhaps I haven't been able to still my mind enough to allow her to visit or be aware of it. But I know that she's still watching over me. As I reflect, I have to wonder if it weren't for her, would I be the queer person I am today, or would I be living another life? I am forever grateful for my Aunt Cora and that her legacy of loving acceptance lives on in her daughter Diane, her granddaughter Ashley, and great-granddaughter Audrey.
One day, about 4 years ago, I was at the local library working on a project. I'd been there long enough to feel settled and working steadily. I came across something, I'm not sure what it was, maybe a word, a phrase, or something I overheard from another patron. I still today don't remember, but my mind was suddenly on my maternal grandfather, and I began to weep. Uncontrollably weeping, my skin felt warm, my body began to shake, and deep sobs were coming from inside of me. I couldn't stop crying, and I kept calling out to my grandfather. In the midst of my tears, I realized, somewhat shockingly, that I was grieving my grandfather for the first time. I say shockingly because my grandfather had been dead for over 20 years at that point. How could it be? How could it be that I was only grieving him 20 years later? I'm sure I could have come up with all sorts of reasons that made sense, and some of them might even have been reasonable, but I'm quite sure that others would have been just excuses. I left the library that morning for I needed a private space to mourn. Moreover, I was in no shape to focus on anything else. So I went home. I spent the day crying, reflecting on the life of my grandfather, and sharing about his life with my niece who was visiting me at that time. And by the end of that day, I decided that I was never going to feel that far away. I was never going to let my mind and heart be that far away from him again. And I needed to acknowledge the role he played in my life as a child and how essential he was to the person that I am today. I discerned that I needed to honor my grandfather, this ancestor of mine, in a tangible and meaningful way. He was the first person that I learned unconditional love from. That deep desire that I had, still have, to honor someone who came before me is one that I share with many others in the human family. It seems to be a human need. I've found that there are various ways that people honor and celebrate the dead around the world. This time of year, when in many cultures the veil between the world of the dead and that of the living is considered thin, ancestors are commemorated. They are remembered. They are celebrated and are honored. Let's look at some of those ways. All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, they are two Western Christian celebrations of the dead, that are days apart one from the other. All Saints' Day honors the saints, and All Souls' Day is the celebration of the faithfully departed, where Christians are encouraged to remember those who passed on. This can include cemetery and grave rituals such as offering of flowers, candles, and prayers, or blessing for the graves of loved ones. All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, they came out of a belief that there is a powerful spiritual bond between those in heaven and the living. In Nepal, there is the Jia Jatra, an 8-day festival that is held annually to honor those who died the previous year. This festival includes a procession around the city, sometimes with a photo of the dead hung at the center of whatever carriage that the people are on. And then they present devotions to their loved ones. It is said also in this culture that the gates of heaven for the dead are opened this day, and the procession will help their beloveds to reach the gates of heaven if they march around the city. People celebrate this festival not only for their dead relatives, but also for peace and harmony among their family members and their city. This particular celebration of the dead reminds me a little bit of the practice in many UU congregations where we remember members and friends who died the previous year. Of course, we don't have the procession, the remembrance part. In Malaysia, there is the Hari Moyang, or Ancestors' Day, which is when people offer prayers to their ancestors and thank them for good fortune and ask for future prosperity. It is a celebration about giving thanks to the spirit for all the good things they have bestowed upon the people. There is, of course, Mexico's El Día de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead. I think many of you are familiar with this one. A version of this was celebrated every year at my first home congregation in Cleveland, Ohio. But for some reason, it didn't connect for me. Maybe it's because I didn't have any connection to the tradition itself. I went through the motions, but I realized that 4 years ago when I was sobbing and weeping for my grandfather, that it didn't have any significance for me because I carried a picture of my grandfather through that celebration every year. But I think it was more performance than anything else. And I completely understand that this ritual, though it didn't work for me, for those it resonates and it is beautiful and it honors their ancestors. What I find to be of particular importance in this celebration is that any sign of sadness on that day is considered offensive to the dead. Instead, the family is encouraged to take part in activities that the departed enjoyed in life. That is a way I would like to be honored. And across the world, there are many other ways that people honor their ancestors, no matter what their faith tradition is. Perhaps in your own culture, there are specific ways that the ancestors are honored. Or do you have your own personal way or individual tradition? I didn't grow up with a practice of celebrating my ancestors, and that may be your story too. If so, or if you're looking for some new ways to honor your ancestors, I can offer some suggestions. And also keep in mind that because many of us have had to make our own families, that ancestors do not have to be people we are connected to by blood. They are those who have loved us into the space that we are today. Let us celebrate them by remembering them with all of their flaws and understanding that they were complex human beings. My grandfather, for example, I was his favorite. And he was always so good to me and spoiled me, but it can't be said to be the case for everyone else. So when I remember him, I also remember that he was a flawed being. We can honor our ancestors by being compassionate toward ourselves and by doing right by the next generation, whose ancestors we will become, by working towards becoming our best selves and speaking our truth, by working towards a more just world as our Unitarian ancestors and others have done, by creating maybe an altar in your own personal space for them, and so many other ways. By celebrating Papa Prudent, my grandfather, I don't just honor him, I honor all those who came before him. But just for him, that day, as I was looking through pictures of him, I made the decision of having a painting made of one of those pictures. And that painting hangs in a prominent place in my home. You've probably seen it if you've been on the screen with me. My prayer for you is that if this is something of interest to you, that you find a way, if you haven't already, your own unique way to celebrate and honor your ancestors. May it be so.
The ancestor I'm honoring today is my mother. Deborah Turner was a voracious reader and writer. She earned her MFA in poetry and spent her career in academic publishing. Needless to say, I learned from a very young age to enjoy her love of books. When she retired, she chose to fulfill her lifelong dream to write her first novel. And while at the same time, I was also working on some fiction writing of myself. So we talked often of our shared struggles, all of those common pitfalls that writers come across. When she passed unexpectedly in 2016, she had finished her first draft, but not all of the edits. My sister and I plan to honor her by finishing the editing process and working to publish her novel posthumously. It's our way of celebrating her hard work, passion, and creativity, as well as share her legacy with the world for years to come.
For those who came before us, we offer gratitude and thanks. May their memories be a blessing. May we feel surrounded by their love as we go forth from this time and place. Let us be inspired by their courage, their wisdom, and their dreams. Let us honor them by doing the work of loving boldly, loving mightily, and creating heaven on earth. Layla Jerlin Jones. Beloveds, worship has ended, and now the service truly begins.
Please say the words with me as we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish the flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.